Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are on this amazing planet. Welcome to Champion for the People, Catana Malinowski, the podcast for the masses. And I'm your host, Catana Malinowski, and today I have with me Jared Troth. And where would you let us know where you're hailing in from, Jared?
From the wonderfully frigid Chicago right now.
Oh boy, yes, it is cold. And you're going to be getting more because we're getting more out here in California. So it
Is that
will
where you
come your
are?
way.
Where in Cali are you right now? Because I'm from there.
Northern California. I'm in,
Oh, I'm SoCal. We're fighting. I'm from San Diego, like the most SoCal of SoCal.
oh
Do
no,
you say hella? Do you say hella?
Cali. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, like, I feel like Southern Californians hate it when Northern Californians say hella. That's the thing that always like grinds their gears. Is that something you do? I've never heard you say it.
Yeah, that's because that was after my generation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just know what grinds everyone's gears down the southern side of California. So,
We
anyway,
the
already off the rails. I'm so sorry.
northern southern SoCal, battles that have been in place since I was knee high to an ant. Yes.
I feel like most states, it's interstates. Like I live in Illinois now, and we fight with Wisconsin all the time back and forth. But California is unique in that it fights with itself culturally, I feel. They're always throwing stones north or south there, it seems. And then San Francisco's just in the middle, like, I don't know, you guys, I'm neutral. They're the Switzerland
They
of the
even
continent.
developed their own county just to do that.
Yeah, just to stay out of it. So yeah, which is probably for the best.
Yeah,
As
I
long
think
as no one says hella, we're good. So
there we go. Okay, well, this is an excellent segue. So, this podcast is about amplifying the voice of the people to our political leaders, and I use that term loosely today. Um, but for better for worse, they're elected officials, and they're often the people that make promises that they can't keep. All they
yeah,
can do is promise to do their best. And in today's atmosphere, one of the things that is missing is the ability to have conversations and what I call non-judgmental conversations. I'm more curious about, what it is that makes a person support a particular idea. What is it that's ticking in their mind? Are they fearful of what they've got and losing it, which is a very real threat, right? And each one of us grabs a hold of whatever life raft we see that we think is going to support us the most. So I can understand where some of these folks that may have voted a different way
yeah.
may be coming from, because whether they realize it or not, there's many of us in that same position. We just see things a little differently and sometimes a lot differently.
The rift has definitely been widening. You know what I mean? I think in the past, I feel like society goes through these ebbs, where it's almost like a pendulum swinging, where it goes from like kind of a more integrated to a more polarized and then back and forth. We go from more progressive to a little bit more suppressive. And it's just right now we're really far in this swing politically where we're very divided. And right now it seems that people who are maybe a little bit more progressive or liberal or however you want to define them, they're not being properly represented. It seems like right now the people who are gaining a lot of tailwind are people who aren't um aren't really like the liberal arts majors of our society. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's kind of what I'm sensing in this moment.
Yes, I also see and have been talking about this for a while. I have 17 years of political experience under my belt, and I don't know if I've shared a lot about that, but one of the things that I learned was that generally speaking, there's a lot of promises made, but the goal is to move their needle forward.
Yeah, I think that's always going to be. I was talking to a friend about this just recently about how we can still persist in a time like this. I think, I'm someone I'm not just gay. I'm like final boss gay. I've been in the gay game for over a decade. I've done I've punched in at almost every single pride for like the past 10 years. And I love it, but I'm definitely not the kind of fledgling, freshly hatched, shaking leg, queer person. Like, we see a lot of that in queer youth, the teens and, the children who are just now trying to figure out like, what does this even mean? What are people going to think of me? How can I handle this? I'm not that gay. I'm the gay who's out there, sending smoke signals to them like, hey, this is how you can progress in life and kind of get to the other side of all this adversity. I'm a living example of how a queer person can find stability, find community, find what it is that they need, find family, which is something I really want to talk about today. I really want to talk about the concept of the nuclear family and how that concept is not only outdated and it's not only kind of hurtful for people who are in nuclear families themselves, but for everybody. It's hurtful for anyone who's experienced a death of a family member, a parent, a divorce. But it is particularly harmful for queer people. This
Yeah.
concept that, you need to be in a heteronormative nuclear environment to be stable, to be reliable, to be a effective member of society, when there are innumerable uh, scientific studies that have shown that that's just not the case.
Right.
So, I don't know, but I will tackle any subject, but I feel like that's kind of what's on my heart these days. That's how I feel like I'm going to get to the heart of the matter and reach across the aisle that is ever widening these days.
And that's where I was going to go with that too, is that, we tend to have a perception, a self-perception when we're navigating the world. We're told to have a self-perception. We're told to always honor ourselves, to express how we feel. And yet when it comes to being able to be in a community, because I feel like community is missing and it's been missing for a long time in not just one town, but all of America, that we've lost our way. And rather than being inclusive and having unconditional love and not judging anybody, which, I could go on ad nauseum, programs and systems that are in place to teach us tolerance. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, tolerance, tolerance, tolerance. And yet
Yeah.
these are some of the first people I saw break the barrier the other direction and become non-tolerant and aggressive and joining these groups that are anti whatever, because it seemed that for whatever reason they felt that by somebody else gaining something, particularly those that they want to add a label to that's not doing life the way they are going to ruin it for them, somehow affect them. And I really would love to have you, you know, really amplify that, especially in terms of the family, because it's community, it's family, it's love, unconditional, non-judgmental. You know, um, I personally would love to see more children and more people experience love that I've seen across all the different spectrums of life from all people. And that to me is what the bottom line is. So if we were sitting right now in a town hall meeting and you were the on stage to give a message to your political leaders and to your community, what this looks like and what it feels like and what positive message you can impart to them, I give you the floor.
This is something that I say a lot, and it's a quote from a TV show back in, I think it was like the early 90s, or not the early 90s. This was a TV show in like the early 2000s called Firefly. Have you heard of it, Firefly? It's Joss Whedon, and the intro song, they have a line in the intro that says, "You can't take the sky from me." And I think as a queer person, my identity, who I am, you can't take that from me. You can't make me not be gay through conversion therapy, through litigation, through law, whatever it is, it's not going to stop me. The same goes for trans people. People have always been trans. It doesn't matter if you say it's not real. You can say that there's only two genders, but then what are these people even doing then? You can say that a non-binary, existence isn't real. Well, then what are these people doing? They're obviously doing something. There are people transitioning from one gender role to another, what is that? If it's not real, then what's going on? So I feel a lot of times like no matter what other people say, I have in and of my own life and my own circle enough people to keep me grounded and keep me in touch with who I know I am. Because there has been no clarity I've ever experienced as much as me knowing that I am a queer person. It's almost to the extent of like, I am a man. I don't know, I am 6 foot tall. There are just like things about me I consider truths. And I think my gender, my sexuality, you know, um, it's just such a deeply rooted part of who I am. For someone to say to me, like, oh, your relationship with your partner, who I'm engaged to, Andrew, isn't valid or isn't real, it doesn't upset me as much as it's just kind of like, oh, that person has no clue what they're talking about, you know? And I think ultimately, queer communities have survived through tenacity, through I think about Dan Savage and what he said about during the AIDS crisis, how in the mornings they would have a funeral, then they would protest and then they would dance. And the dance is what kept them going. And they never thought they were going to win until they did. I think about ACT UP and how they did the die-ins and how they did all these other forms of protest when, we had voices like Nancy Reagan, who is incredibly problematic, Anita Bryant, who's incredibly problematic, but they had their own issues, Anita Bryant was somebody who came from a really dysfunctional background. I understand why she has a broken conception of what family is, what gender identity is, what sexuality is. She was she went through a lot. Does it make everything that she said and did okay? No, but it's so interesting to me that someone as like disturbed as Anita Bryan was campaigning for normalcy or for some sort of like societal norms. It's really surprising to me that Nancy Reagan talked a lot about purity when she was known as the throat goat in Hollywood, and she was one of the most promiscuous people there. That's how she met Ronald Reagan, was through her promiscuity. So it's very interesting that these people were trying to define something that they just didn't have. And I understand that. I think that desire, let me fix these lights. Can I do that real quick?
Yes.
Sorry, it's driving me crazy. 1 second. Come on. Okay, now we're good. Sorry about that. Um, but no, I think that there are these people who have dealt with these traumatic things, and this is how they cope with it. And it's not necessarily right, but it does kind of help explain their origins. And maybe, we should have a little bit of compassion for these people because I think that for them, this makes sense. For them, this is the answer that they needed their whole time. I think about when I was younger, I went to Bible college. I was considered a cheat. I wasn't allowed to do Bible trivia because I knew too much. So they were like, Jared has to sit this one out. He can come up with the really hard questions, you
Yeah.
know? And I think a lot of people in the church see me as kind of this threatening, uh, just specter, because it's like, oh, he knew it all. And yet he's still who he is today. And at the time, my thought was my doubt in my faith is just due to a lack of knowledge. I need to learn more about religion. And what I learned was that like what we believe is due to, you know, the guy who thought of it killed everyone who disagreed with him. And it's like, well, that's not really how religion and truth and God and loving people should work. So, the more I learned, the more I was like, oh, this is clearly bullshit. But, that I don't know where I'm getting at with this. I think it's just one of those things. I understand the other side of the aisle because I sat in that side of the aisle. I have for years been like, gay is a choice, gay is a sin, gay is a mental illness, and at the time I just wanted to be straight. I had a lot at stake. I wanted to go into ministry and I knew I couldn't do that in the denomination that I was in if I came out as gay. And the only representation of homosexuals I saw at the time was incredibly negative. They were people who were very vile. I remember the first time I had a gay hookup. You want to hear about this?
Sure.
All right. So it's a little explicit, but I'll try to keep it a little Disney. Is us Disney gays, we
That
get
is
away with a lot.
explicit.
But no, so I was getting into a relationship with a girl, and I remember thinking to myself, like, if I'm gonna be hetero, I need to know what I'm missing out on. I need to know what it is. Like, just what is this gay thing? And I met up with a guy on gay.com, and we met at a 7-Eleven. In my naive mind, I was 16. I was lying about my age. Don't do that, kids. Stay in school, whatever. But I come over to his place from the 7-Eleven. We hook up. There's photos of his husband. They married in Canada, that he had put down throughout the apartment, but I picked one up. And I just remember thinking, like, if this is what gay is, I don't want to be this. I felt gross, and it kind of validated all of the negative things that I've heard spewed from behind the pulpit. So it just, I bolstered myself in the closet for years after that, because I remember thinking, if this is what gay is, I do not want that. And it took me a long time to realize that you can have healthy, happy, stable relationships as a gay person. You don't have to be going around being promiscuous, cheating, or whatever it is. You can actually be a faithful, stable, intelligent, put together homosexual. That is something that's real. And that's something I'm living today, which is why I consider myself the elder gay, and hopefully can provide support for the younger ones.
Well, that's perfect. You just said something that brings me back to what you were talking about with Anita Bryant and Nancy Reagan and the things that they did. They weren't necessarily the most healthy choices either, correct? These are
Yeah,
things that were always typically known as taboo.
yeah.
And what gets me is um this notion of something being right or wrong,
Mhm.
right? And so there's this great need to have both the money but also this control, right? And something money gives them access. That's what we're seeing today with Musk, right? We've got
Yeah,
the access
yeah.
for what that's worth. And at the same time, you have these people that behind the scenes do not, they want to control everybody's lives. They want to dictate to everybody. And they've been going at it since the Reagan era and
Mhm.
potentially beyond that. Politics is not where I believe, and I don't believe a lot of folks feel this way, or I believe a lot of folks feel this way, is that politics isn't where you decide what goes on in somebody's home. It isn't what you dictate, I mean, short of murdering people and hiding them in the freezer, right?
Yeah.
As a society, we can agree upon that. But deciding what love looks like, deciding what a normal human being looks like, making these types of um, just determinations. I just recently we had a conversation. There was a community conversation here in my town, and they said they wanted to reach out across the aisle and have this talk about whether woke was going to destroy democracy. And I chimed in and I said, on their post sharing that on Facebook that this conversation was going to happen was that, hey, just from somebody who's got a lot of political perspective here, that type of question puts people on the defensive because
Yeah.
immediately you're bringing this presumption that what you see as right or wrong when it was in, actually something that was developed by the African American community in the 1920s and 30s as a way to be aware of the social and political issues that were affecting them.
And I think things like that, Facebook posts, my goodness, Facebook is, it's interesting because GLAD actually has a report on what social media sites are safe for queer youth, and pretty much all of them gets an F. TikTok gets a D. So there's really no safe quarters for queer youth right now when it comes to social media. But Facebook is particularly toxic, and I think everybody knows that. I don't think anyone would disagree. That is not a politically, debated, is Facebook toxic? Yes.
Yeah.
I think we can all say yes.
Yes.
But what I would say is it's not worth a queer person's time or efforts to engage in that kind of stuff. I think what's so much more important is that we provide society with an example of what what true queer culture is. Because I think that there's the Disney gays, there's, the bury the gays kind of trope, there's the villainous gays, there's all sorts of misrepresentations out there. It reminds me a lot of whenever there's any sort of bigotry, I think about during the Holocaust, how they portrayed Jewish people. I think about, in early America after the Civil War, how they portrayed people of color. And it's this parody. And the thing about parody, it's projection, which isn't real. And when you're seeing these misrepresentations, what it's doing is it's skewing people's perception of what's real. But you have to remember that if all you've ever seen are those projections, you've never actually seen the reality. There's a lot of people who have seen projections of trans people on Fox News or wherever else, but a projection is not reality. It's kind of like looking at a map and it's like, this is a projection, this is a representation, but this isn't actually Indiana or whatever map you're looking at. That's not Indiana. It's just a representation of it. And that's the same thing that goes on with queer people in the media today, is that there is a lot of false representations going on. So I think what's really important is that we uplift people like Laverne Cox, who is a, trans actress of color, and she's an outstanding person. She's an outspoken person. And seeing more people like her in the public eye is going to be incredibly beneficial, because what it does is, by showing the public that this is a normal queer healthy person, normal queer healthy relationship, all those arguments, all those Facebook posts lose their bite, they lose their sting, and it just kind of becomes crazy radicalized noise. And I think that's really important. Is that my relationship with Andrew, is something where we put work into our relationship. We make sure it's good. We make sure that we love and care for each other. We go to couples therapy, and not because there's anything necessarily wrong. It's just we want to make sure everything's right. And what that's resulted in is one of the most beautiful relationships I've ever seen. And I know that there are heterosexual people in my life who envy the kind of connection that we have, which I think is a sign of success for me. That's honestly, I want the relationship that everybody else wants. Gay, straight, it doesn't matter. And I think I have that. So I want that to be visible to people. I want everything about my queer identity and the successes that I have in it. I'm very successful in my career. I'm very successful in my health and my life. I'm successful financially. I'm successful in a lot of different ways. And that's all in tandem with me being gay. And there's a lot of people in this world who think that that's not possible. There's a lot of queer young people who think that's not possible. And that's what's important, is that when I go to some pride, I'm not there to wear a Speedo and dance around on a float. I'm there, and I'm there to make sure that the people who are coming there for the first time, who need it, have support and have community. You talked about community, and I think it's so important because community stems from necessity, especially in the queer world. We have these bars and all these other things, but I think it's really important that these communities exist online, that these communities exist offline, that these communities exist in schools, I think they should exist in churches. I mean, call me radical, but I think that it's something where no matter where you go, there should be a presence of, if you are queer, there is a place for you where you will be safe and accepted. And what stinks right now is that doesn't exist, you know?
Yes, we're coming up on our last minute here. And what I like about what you just said is, having that safe space and community. And I'm going to give you, you've got 50 seconds to sum up. What would safety and community look like? Would it be inclusive of everybody around you? Or do you feel like there's a lot of pushback to even being around heterosexuals by your own community? I mean, is this something that we want to blend? Where do we want to go? Run with it. We've got about 20 seconds here.
You know what? I'll go with Maya Angelou and what she said. She said, "Family isn't always blood. It's the people in your life who want you in theirs, the ones who accept you for who you are. There's also George Bernard Shaw, and if it got room for another one, a happy family is but an earlier heaven. You know, oh, and then there's Barbara Kingsolver, who said sometimes the strength of motherhood is greater than natural laws. And I think that that's so beautiful because, like, it doesn't matter if you have a mom and a dad and two kids and, you know, a two-car garage. What matters is that you just have this connection, this love. That's what matters. Love is what matters. And it doesn't matter what form it comes in. It just matters that we love the love, that we foster the love, and that we celebrate the love. That's
That is well said. Well
it.
said. Because I agree. I absolutely agree. Lots of love and sending it out to all of you. I know it's a short recording, and but thank you, Jared, because you brought a lot of richness to this conversation. And and upon sharing it, I will get that link out to you, and I will put any links to you back in to your, into the notes. And
Okay.
so I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing that part of your story. And I hope we can do it again.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.